We basically want to take away your success because they don't have any. It's treating life as a zero-sum game. It's saying because you won, these other people lost. And that is just not true. There's no such thing as someone losing because you won. That is only true of games and sports, where there are winners and there are losers, but that is not true of life. Thank you for tuning into this latest episode of Bigger Hearts, Deeper Minds. This is an episode I really should have recorded a long time ago. It's one that I think about a lot and something that I've talked with quite a few friends about over the recent years, which is, why is it so hard to talk politics with people? Why is politics an increasingly difficult subject, not just in figuring out your own positions, but talking about it with others? And why is it so difficult to have rational, ethical, honest conversations with people? Why does it always seem like people are so quick to be cutthroat and to be defensive? Why does it feel like if you even just mention a person's name, like Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or Joe Biden, that people instantly pick a side or feel like they have to pick a side? Why does all this happen? These are questions that we're going to talk about in this episode, and I've found some really interesting statistics that will hopefully help me speak a little bit more informed on the matter. But let's go ahead and dive right in. So why is it so difficult to talk to people about politics? Why is it such a divisive issue? Well, I think the real answers to this question go way further back than even one lengthy podcast episode could cover. But it's important to really look at not only the modern landscape, but what are the factors that have contributed to everything that we see today. Basically, I should preface this too with the fact that this episode is going to deal purely with American politics. I would like to, in future episodes, get into politics of other countries. Obviously, politics is a global concern, and there's a lot of differences between nations, but this episode is going to deal strictly with American politics. So let's go ahead and jump right in. The first note I made is people have deeply held perceptions and beliefs. So obviously, if you're someone who's generally following politics to begin with, you're probably going to have quite a few opinions on political matters. That's pretty normal. But what it seems has become the case, and I think only time will tell what this really looks like in America, but it seems like as time has gone on, more and more people have gotten involved in politics and care about it to some extent. And I think as a result of that, people's opinions have been strengthened and their viewpoints have been expanded as a result of the involvement. Because people, you can have your opinion on politics, but it's one thing to have an opinion on politics and to just kind of glaze over it. It's a very different thing to have your opinion on politics and to be someone who's involved in it on a daily basis or even a weekly basis. Even if you're someone that just checks the news and you care about a couple particular issues, that is a lot more involved than someone who doesn't listen to shows or watch anything at all. But what I found really interesting, and honestly this isn't too surprising, this actually comes from the New York Times. They say that about 80 to 85% of Americans don't really follow politics at all. So it's really just 15 to 20% of people who are what they call deeply involved in politics. So yeah, it's not too surprising that, politics in general is a hot button issue. A lot of people don't like to talk about it. A lot of people don't want to get on anyone's bad side. And that all makes sense. It's people want to have friends. People want to have lives. They don't want politics to touch every corner of their lives, and nor should they. I don't want politics to touch every corner of my life either. I love politics. I'm very interested in it. I'm always trying to learn more, but I don't want to have it, touch stuff with my band or things that I do in my personal time. Like that's my decision. So it's really, one out of every five people, just to round up, one out of every five people you meet, that is the person who's interested in politics. The other four people, they are just really not tuned into it, or they're just following it very casually. Like if the TV is on at their friend's house, or they happen to, I don't know, they're waiting for their their car at the mechanic and the TV is on there, radio, whatever. They're just kind of checking it out in passing, but they're not really interested in it as a part of their daily life and what they follow. And I completely respect that. If anything, those are the people who sometimes make the best decisions about politics, because they're not letting their passions inflame them and drive them to potentially harmful decisions or hasty decision making. But what I find even more interesting than the fact that only one out of every five people are interested in politics on a very close level is that Republicans and Democrats in America are starting to become a stronger association, I guess, amongst each side. And basically what I mean by that is Republican positions are getting more concentrated and Republican voters are getting more concentrated. And it's the same is true of liberal or Democrat voters. And it's worth mentioning that not every person who's liberal votes Democrat, and not every person who's conservative votes Republican. But obviously, for the most part, people stand in their party lines. But what Pew Research shows us, and I've cited some of their research in other recent episodes too, this comes from a little while ago, about 2017. There's a greater partisan divide and a greater divide between political values on both sides than there ever has been in at least recent American history. American political history is checkered with a lot of different issues and many different divides, and there used to be the Democratic Republicans, actually, if I'm not mistaken. But anyways, Republicans, people are starting to be more and more consistently conservative, and on Democrats, people are being more and more consistently liberal. So basically what that means is there are fewer and fewer voters in the middle. There's more and more people who are picking a side and staying with it than there ever have been in the recent past. And so Republicans are consistently concerned with illegal immigration. It tends to be something that they view as a major issue in American political life, and that continues to be one of the chart-topping, vote-swinging issues for them. And when it comes to Democrats/liberals, liberals are consistently concerned with the influence of millionaires, billionaires, people who, I guess in a term, what you would call is dirty money in politics, things of that nature, special interest groups that they oppose. These seem to be issues that they are really concerned about. And I heard recently that another issue that they're facing a lot, or that they want resolved, is I guess they're having an increasing issue with just conservatives in general, which I have certainly seen that that's the case. The way that the mainstream media portrayed the January 6th Capitol Hill insurrection moment was portrayed very differently than things that happened last summer, 2020. A lot of these riots and protests and, buildings being smashed and burned, and a lot of these rather violent moments all across America. These were largely created in part, I should say, as George Floyd protests, Black Lives Matter protests, things of that nature. They were all kind of loosely grouped in with one another. That was definitely the overarching theme, along with defund the police. A lot of these things, run in very parallel circles. Granted, there are different sects of liberalism, like you've got your democratic socialists, you've got your socialists, communists, you've got your kind of general American liberals, for lack of a better term. And a lot of these people actually don't agree with each other. A lot of the socialist anarchists and just socialist types in general hold very different views from just kind of your, again, standard American liberal Democrat. But the point is, we're seeing more political concentration on both sides than we have either in a long time or potentially ever in American history. And so this is very concerning. People have their deeply held beliefs and their positions, and they are starting to just camp out there and stay camped out there longer. So the second thing is misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and I know that's a very vague and general statement, but it's very true. There are hundreds of news retractions, journalistic issues that either never go corrected or they get corrected and they never get mentioned. They never get mentioned in the news because the news doesn't want to make themselves look bad. They just want to make themselves look good. And so what happens is the news media, and we'll get to the fact that Americans have an all-time low trust in the media in a little bit. But basically what happens is the media reports on whatever they want to report on, and more importantly, however they want to report on it. And it goes unreported that something was wrong or something was touted as fact or news when it was really opinion. At the time of this recording, something really interesting is happening with Project Veritas because the New York Times, coincidentally enough, has Project Veritas and NYT are involved in a lawsuit that the New York Times tried to get dismissed, and the judge threw out the NYT's dismissal request, and so Project Veritas has been pursuing what it would look like to not only continue with the suit, but what they would need to do. And I'll post a link in the description below because I won't have time to go into the entire story here. But basically, the New York Times was saying that Project Veritas was saying untrue things, when in reality, Project Veritas was simply reporting on the truth. And Project Veritas decided to sue the New York Times because they were defaming what Project Veritas was doing. They were basically saying, yeah, those guys over there, what they're saying isn't true, and you can't say that because that is illegal in the journalistic and news world. You can't say that what someone is saying about the truth is false, and then you can't act like what you're saying is true, especially if it's false. Pretty complex stuff, but they do a great job of explaining it. So like I said, I'll leave that in the description. Be sure to check that out if you're interested in learning more about it. But misinformation is a very real issue, and let's get more specific here so we don't just leave it at misinformation. Number one, just like we talked about, you might be reading opinion that is being shared or touted as news, and you have to, if you are going to be sharing something that you're interested in or you like the content, you should be aware of what you're reading and whether it's opinion, fact, or satire. And all of those are completely different. Fact, news it's supposed to be, as the old phrase goes, just the facts. It's just got to be exactly what happened, no personal spin, no bias, no nothing. Just exactly what happened. Doesn't matter if you like it or if you don't. It's what it is. Opinion, obviously, can be someone's personal take on the matter, and it can include facts and it can reference real news, but it still has to be clearly marked and labeled as opinion. And then satire, obviously, is kind of building up a story based on, it could be opinion or fact, or a mix of both. And so it's not always easy to spot what is the difference between all of these. I mean, Babylon Bee, they're very clear that they're a satire site, and hopefully anyone who's been reading them more than a couple minutes realizes that, oh, this is satire, this is so funny, it obviously can't be true. They definitely have something on their website that shows people, yes, this is satire, this is not, this is comedy writing, this is not real news, nor is it usually opinion. But sometimes trusted media sources, especially big ones, purport to be sharing the news when what they're really sharing is their opinion. And it's often a very slanted opinion at that. And as a libertarian, I'd like to point out that both the right and the left do this. I don't really trust a whole lot of big sources on the right or the left unless I can independently verify something. You know, like with the New York Times stat that I cited earlier in this podcast episode, that is very easy information to verify and cross-check, that 1 in 5 Americans, basically 15 to 20%, is the highest number of Americans that are super interested in politics and follow it all the time. That is not an outlandish thing to say, and you can verify it elsewhere, like Pew Research. I'm sure you can find stuff like that on, right-wing media sources like Washington Times, stuff like that. But there's no, it's very hard to inject your opinion into that. And yet all too often, we are seeing people who are inflamed and enraged on both sides, getting so frustrated with what the other side says that they just decide to write something that makes the other side look bad. And that is what leads to a lot of misinformation, is people are basically taking little bits and pieces of what happened and stuffing their opinion into the rest of it. And that is not good reporting. It's not good journalism. You have every right in the world, especially in America, to be publishing your opinion. But you should, if you're going to be writing about the facts and you want to talk about the truth, you should be doing your job, doing your research, and making sure that what you put out there is quality and that it can't be easily just knocked down by other people who have actually done their work. I think my favorite example of this is the Nick Sandmann story with CNN, and I'm actually blanking on his name right now, but the Native American guy who was, I believe he was, doing a demonstration. He was obviously at the same place that Nick Sandmann was, and the news basically goes up to, I know his name was Nathan something, but basically all the media captures is Nathan, and he has already walked up to this Nick Sandmann guy, and it's the Covington Catholic kids, as they were referred to after this media incident. And the media portrays it as though Nick Sandmann is like smirking with they portray it as though he's like having this evil smirk on his face and looking at Nathan, and that Nick Sandmann was just evil because it's the particular angle that they got, and it's this picture that was shared widely on many, many articles on social media, and I saw a ton of friends talking about it at the time. In that particular moment, I actually knew that I just felt in my gut. I was like, this is probably not going to go the way that people think it's going to go. And like, first of all, I was like, there's nothing, like, even in that picture doesn't tell you the whole story. Anyone who has a good amount of media literacy and information literacy, and you understand, you can't just take one still image of what the media has decided to show you and treat that as the entire story. It's just not. It's not possible to do that. You don't even see the before or the after. You have to be willing to see the entire story before you are going to make a decision on what happened. And you have to take context from both sides. That is what a lot of people are so reluctant to do, is they only want the context from their side. Or I should say the quote unquote context. It's not context if you're getting it from one side. You have to be willing to get it from both sides. And so essentially what happened is Nick Sandmann sued CNN. He actually sued the Washington Post and CNN for a massive amount of money for defamation. And all of this got resolved. It's looking like, I'm trying to find the date here. last year. It was last fall. Really, as a lot of political stuff was starting to build up for the 2020 U.S. presidential election. So it's hilarious to see what happened as a result of everything with Nick Sandmann. But he sued and he won because all of this defamation, against him. Even though Nathan walked up to him at that particular event, the media only made it look like Nick was this smug MAGA hat wearing white kid who basically was just being rude. But yeah, if you watch the video, there's plenty of evidence showing that he was standing right where he was. I don't think he even said anything. I don't think Nick Sandmann lifted a hand. I don't think he did a single thing. I think he just stood there and smiled. And so he sued and he won, and he did a little bit at the Republican National Convention. Anyone who's listening knows that I am not a Republican, but I am not going to lie. I really enjoyed seeing him get what he deserved, which was victory in the face of these media giants who just want to portray something false that has nothing to do with reality and stokes the ire of people who are not willing to sit down and learn more about the story. And I'm not saying that, it's not about being perfect. It's not about, the media has never reported on anything good or useful. Obviously, these big sites like Fox News and CNN, even the New York Times, there's still reporting that they do that's accurate and useful. It's not 100% bad. So I'm not out here to just throw the baby out with the bathwater entirely. But when you make mistakes that are this grave in nature and you are not even willing to show people the truth and say, we got it wrong. And it's even worse when people are doing this stuff on purpose. A lot of these media companies are spinning a story on purpose. They're taking a shred of truth and they're spinning a story around it. And they expect you to think that, I think they really expect you to not do your research. They're almost expecting people to be dumb and to not look at this stuff themselves. So I find that shocking. But that is just one of the more recent examples of misinformation out there. Basically, we're going to get to solutions later in this episode. But what we should really be looking at is, first you should understand, who am I getting this information from? Is this a biased source? Is this an openly biased source? Or am I getting it from something that's pretty straightforward and people who are really just reporting on the facts, and there's no weird stuff laced in, and they're not trying to make just regular information seem like a story. And then be willing to challenge yourself. They say that most people who are liberals are consuming almost exclusively liberal media, and conservatives aren't much different than that. They're saying conservatives get their news from about 2/3 conservative sources and about 1/3 liberal sources. And I have to check myself on this stuff too. I don't have a perfect 50-50. But what you should strive for is a good balance. You should be willing to say, hey, if I've been reading like only Fox News for the last 10 years, maybe there's something else out there that I can learn that Fox News is not reporting on. Same goes for something like CNN. CNN is only going to report on what they want to report on. They're going to distribute the information that they think is valuable. You're really going to challenge your views, and you're going to get a lot more balanced approach to everything. Even if you don't necessarily agree with some of the new media that you're consuming, you're at least going to not be pigeonholing yourself into only consuming information from one source. It's a very dangerous idea because it can make you think that only one way of getting information is right, and it can also make you think that only one viewpoint on any particular issue is right. That is a very, very dangerous place to be. You should always, even if you know where you stand on something, you should always be willing to hear from the other side and be open-minded, especially when it comes to politics. Other issues in life, I respect that people have their views and they want to stick to them. But politics, it's very easy to get things mixed up. So at the very least, you should be willing to listen to other people. Media agendas. This is a perfect transition into the next one, because the media, every media company, I feel like every major media company out there has an agenda. They have something that they are trying to push, and it's not really getting any better, unfortunately. We are seeing new media companies pop up. We are seeing very intelligent and hardworking people creating media assessment companies. Companies that independently check facts and look at bias and look at what sort of skew a particular publication has as far as the topics they cover and how they cover it and the degree to which other things are covered or not covered. And that is really important. So we absolutely need that. But it's media agenda. You have to be able to understand that if someone is trying to get a message out to you, especially if it's in the media, there's a reason. Most media companies, just by their nature, are not 100% innocent. Most media companies, whether conservative or liberal, they have something that they are trying to get out there. So you have to ask yourself, what is the agenda that they're trying to push, or what is the sort of overarching message that they want people to understand? Number two, are they balanced in their approach? Are they willing to, invite people from the other side? Someone like Tim Pool mentions, he often describes himself as basically a kind of like a centrist liberal, or almost like a left-leaning libertarian at times. He has said many times that he's invited numerous people who are on the left on the show, but he doesn't hear back from a lot of them. And he invites a lot of other people who are libertarian, anarchist, conservative. He has a lot more guests on his show of that bent, or I should say of those bents, because none of those things are quite the same. He has a lot more people like that on his show than he does people who are on the left. I find that interesting, but not too interesting, because conservatives, libertarians, anarchists, people like that, those ideologies by today's standards are a lot more associated with individualism and the willingness to think freely and talk about just what you think and not necessarily adhere to what the group thinks. And I think he's right in that liberals are a little bit more, I guess, group-minded, collectively minded than individually minded. And I think that's definitely something to be concerned about. But it also just reveals how people think. If liberals really do believe that, if I disagree with the group, then that is going to be an issue, then that's what they think. That they're free to think that. It just means that as time goes on, if that is how liberals continue to think and believe and act, the real individualists are going to be in the center, not identifying with politics at all, or somewhere on the right. So, yeah, that's definitely something else to talk about. Tied in with that, this is an article from Time, from the, I believe, famous writer David French, about how America is being pulled apart. And I think he's pretty much right on in this article. I think this is a very, very well-written article on the whole. He is talking about how when like-minded people gather together, they tend to grow more extreme. That's a direct quote from this article. I'll link it in the description below. Essentially what it means is, if you gather a ton of people together, they might not agree on specific things, but the more you put people who already agree together, they tend to push their ideology and their position further and further. And we definitely see this because there are abortion laws in Illinois and New York that were enacted not too long ago, where they are allowing abortions to happen up until the point of birth. And I'm definitely going to do a much bigger episode on abortion and hopefully multiple episodes on that in the future. But anyone who knows me knows I am very passionate about this issue. I am very much pro-life. But it just goes to show, and this applies to the media as well, that the more there are similar people put together, they are going to just continue to take their ideology further and further. So definitely check out this David French article. It's really interesting stuff, and there's nothing like getting yourself out of, like I said, getting yourself out of the normal media you consume to get yourself to think differently about something. The next thing is the next reason it's difficult to talk with people about politics is there's a desire to conform. This is just innate in humans. We have a desire to want to fit in. We want people to like us. We want to feel like we have an in-group. We want to feel like there's a group of people who agree with us and we agree with them. It makes us feel safe, makes us feel heard, makes us feel seen. We don't feel like we're being isolated, and all of this makes sense. But it's a very dangerous thing to do if you're voting a certain way, supporting a particular type of politician, and you're just doing it to be accepted by other people. Not only does it mean that you are not necessarily doing your research on the issues that you should be, but you might be supporting things that down the road you yourself would reject when it turns into a real life policy. One great example is a lot of people want equality, especially on the left. But what's difficult to accept is if equality is really something to be attained, it means that people have to have things in their life that are equal. So that comes down to housing, that comes down to money, that comes down to jobs, comes down to places to live, comes down to food, comes down to everything. True equality, and this is something to expand on much more in a different episode, true equality means everything is equal. It means people make the same amount of money, they drive the same car, they wear the same clothes, they're the same height, they like the same bands, they don't like the same bands, same everything, right? So that is a very dangerous way to look at life. Number one, people are not equal. Number two, that is a tragic fact of life. There are people who make more money than other people, but that's mostly up to people's decisions. It's mostly up to the way you've lived your life and the choices you've made in your life. A doctor makes more money than a store clerk for many reasons. And it's just astonishing that people truly think that equality is something that we can achieve. Now, I want to say equality is something that you can achieve in some areas of life. Like, everybody should be equal before the law. Everybody should have equal access to the same types of opportunities. Everybody should have equal access to things like water and food. It's not making the case that people should be in poverty. No one wants people to be in poverty. I don't want people to be in poverty. People who know me before I started the show know that I've been involved in numerous, I've organized events to help people get out of poverty. I've organized fundraisers, benefit concerts, just kind of donation events, what have you. You name it, I've probably organized some type of event like that in the past. And I'm very passionate about that, and people should be. We should have people getting excited about the fact that we can help lift people out of poverty. But you can't force people to be equal outside of some of these basic things in life. You can't force people to like the same things. You can't force people to follow the same religion or not follow one at all. You can't force people to even like the same color. You can't even force people to like the same food. So instead of trying to force equality with people, we should try to create opportunities where people have equal access to things. I'm a total believer in that people should have equal access to all sorts of helpful things in life, like job opportunities, healthcare, just basic human health, like I said before, food and water. That stuff should go without being questioned. Everything else, not only is it impossible, people often have ulterior motives for trying to do that. Because if you're trying to make people equal, it's probably because you're trying to control them or have power over them. And that is exactly what we see with the media, because people are trying to, media companies are trying to make people equally dumb. And that is a recipe for not only corrupt power, or I should say corrupt people who are in positions of power. It's a recipe for revolt, because people are not going to take well to the idea that you are trying to control them and be the overseer of everything in their life. So conformity, I don't even know how we got there from conformity, but basically people want to be liked. People want to be welcome in the in-group. And so basically people will conform with the people who they want to be respected by. That is just a recipe for not good things, because I guess that's how we got there, from the equality idea. So if people want people to be equal, they might vote for higher taxes on the rich, because on the surface it sounds like, well, we're going to tax the rich, we're going to make people more equal by basically taking more money away from the rich. Not only does that not work, and by the way, it punishes success, which is really never something that you want, because you're training people to be unsuccessful then. Or I should say you're encouraging people to be unsuccessful even more than you are training them. Oftentimes, the government tries to force equality through by raising taxes, changing the tax laws. When you're an adult and you're paying for your own life, you're paying for your own bills, things like that, it gets a lot harder to I guess respect the idea of financial equality amongst all people, because it creates an environment where people are no longer benefiting from the freedom they had to make their own decisions. And of course, I can already hear people saying, well, don't you want people to have, great opportunities, and don't you want people to do well for themselves and have the money they need to live? Yes, of course I do. But you have to understand that people are going to make different decisions, and trying to tax people out of trying to tax the prosperity and the success out of people, that's just going to de-incentivize success. It's going to de-incentivize everything that honestly makes the world flourish. Entrepreneurship and specialization in tasks, those are things that are the direct outpouring of the freedom that people have to make decisions. If you all of a sudden punish people who have done really well for themselves in life, what you're really saying is, you did so well, and for these other people who didn't do well, we basically want to take away your success because they don't have any. It's treating life as a zero-sum game. It's saying, because you won, these other people lost. And that is just not true. There's no such thing as someone losing because you won. That is only true of games and sports, where there are winners and there are losers, but that is not true of life. Everybody can be a winner. You just have to respect the fact that people will win in different ways. Let's talk about cognitive dissonance before we get into the solutions. So cognitive dissonance is basically the idea that when you are greeted with... So let's take it back a step, actually. First, everybody has specific ideas that they hold about life. And most of these beliefs are deeply held. So people have deeply held beliefs about themselves, about religion, about the world around them, politics, of course. Cognitive dissonance is the idea that when you come across information that shows you that what you believed was wrong, cognitive dissonance is basically what happens when your brain starts to process that information. It says, your brain starts saying, well, either this information is right, or your belief is right, but they both can't fit. So basically what happens in most people's minds during cognitive dissonance is they hold on to the belief because the belief is more emotionally gratifying than the fact, but the fact is actually true. And the fact would force the belief out, or it would at least force the belief to take on a different form if they accepted the facts, the new information, the new knowledge, whatever it is. And so people are very, very, very particular about what they believe about politics. Most people are very, at the very least, reluctant to talk to other people about their political views. Some are not. Some are, bold and brash, in the words of Squidward, I believe. But anyways, most people are pretty reluctant to talk to others about politics because it's very deeply held beliefs. They don't want to hear information that might show them that they're wrong, and a lot of people too don't want to necessarily come across as rude or aggressive to other people who they like and respect, and I totally appreciate that, and that's a very kind thing. But at the same time, you should be willing, at least on your own time, like I've said before, to read and to consume new information and to be interested in what people are putting out there. Just to see if you're holding beliefs that are represented by the data that we have available. And I totally understand too that sometimes you hold a belief that isn't necessarily represented by data, and it doesn't necessarily need to be, like the fact that, oftentimes it does overlap. Like if we say, so there's about 1 billion people still in the world who go hungry every single day and who probably don't have clean water as well. My belief is that we should work to have a world where those people don't have to suffer anymore. And so, but someone might say, well, my belief is we have to support political candidates who will do something about that. Whereas I would say I care just as much about that as you do. I just don't believe that government is the best solution for those things. I believe that it's the free market and people voluntarily getting together to find a solution. I believe that is the best possible solution to this problem. And so that is where a political difference would crop up. But now that we've talked quite a bit about the issues with why it's so hard to talk with people about politics, let's go ahead and talk about what are some of the solutions? What are some of the ways that we can not only come together more often in conversation, but just as individuals? How can we be open to the process of not political reconciliation, because that doesn't really exist, but political understanding, understanding what people believe, why, what that looks like, just being, I guess, honestly friendlier with each other, being more willing to accept different views. It's something that it seems a lot of increasing number of Americans have a difficult time with. So the first thing, like I've already implied, is humility and an open mind. It takes humility to learn from anyone else. Doesn't matter who it is, what they believe. It takes some humility to not just patently acknowledge that your friend has different political views than you, but to actually try and learn from them. Even if it goes slowly, even if you don't get back to each other for weeks or months at a time, even if you just read one book and that's all you read. That is more than a lot of people will do. A lot of people, and I'm sure this is true of the 20% of Americans who are deeply involved in politics, it's hard. It's hard to change your mind. It's hard. It's not, and not even change your mind, but it's, although you can if you want to, it's hard to be open to new information. It's hard to tell yourself, wow, I was actually wrong about this. Maybe I should take a closer look next time. It's hard to do that. It requires the understanding and the willingness to believe that there could be someone else who has seen something a little bit more accurately than you have. But it all starts with that open mind and just the willingness to hear from people. Do some reading. Realize that maybe you've had your head under a rock a little bit longer than you thought you did. And it can be refreshing too. You can discover information that actually shows you a way to be more in touch with yourself, more in touch with your real beliefs and ideas about things than you ever thought possible before. Another thing we need, especially to combat misinformation, is we need accurate information. We need a world of media, whether that's traditional or new media or both, and I believe it's a combination. We need a world of media that we can trust. We need media that actually speaks to what the real issues are, just the facts, just the information, not people's hyper-partisan spins, not Donald Trump did this again or Joe Biden said that and how ridiculous that was in every single way, or whatever it is. It really doesn't even matter. It doesn't even have to be those two people. It could be local Congress people. It could be local politicians. It could be a mayor of a town. It could be anyone. It could really be anyone. We have to have media that reports strictly on the facts and withholds their opinions. And if you really need opinions, which obviously everybody has one, you can publish that too. But separate the two, keep them separate. They should be as separated as church and state. And, they should be as separate as oil and water is probably a better analogy these days. But, just being willing to have and being able to have the trust in media companies again. And this leads me immediately to my next point, because I feel like it's the only hope that we have for a changed media landscape is we need more decentralized content creators. We need more people who are independent, who are willing to do at least basic research and can still obviously share their opinion on it. I think Tim Pool is a great example. And really just get out there and say, all right, I've done some basic research. This is what I think about the issue. This is what the facts say. This is the best information I've been able to find on this particular incident so far. And so here are my thoughts on it. Because that way you're not getting, when you listen to content created by an independent creator, you're not getting information that is being force-fed to you through some hyper-partisan political agenda, whether that be on the left or the right, or honestly anywhere in between. You're getting someone who takes, first of all, passion in their work, but number two, they have to do a great job, because no one is going to become successful long term if all of the content they're making is garbage in quality. You have to be doing great work in order to get noticed. That is especially true today, and I think that's only going to become increasingly true as the world becomes more and more global and the media landscape starts to look more like the entire world than it does a country or a town. You can still have your local news, and I would recommend, there's never been a better time than now to be paying attention to local news. But more and more people are going to step up into the realm of creating media for a international audience. And so you have to be great, because people can jump to any other content producer at any time if they don't like what you're making, or if they think what you're making is low quality. So you have to be great at what you do, but that is what drives honesty and high quality to begin with, is you're someone who's doing it independently. You're not being given an agenda ahead of time. The fourth and final thing, and this is probably the hardest thing, honestly, but kindness. And yes, I know that might sound cheesy to some people who are listening to this, but kindness really is important, because kindness, let me clarify first too. Kindness does not mean niceness, and it does not mean being a pushover. It means being kind to people. It's very simple. It means even when someone is rude, you do your best to be kind in response. Even when the waiter or waitress at your restaurant is having a rough day and they're not treating you well, Doesn't mean you have to be rude back to them. You could note it and you can be like, yeah, I'm not going to come back to this restaurant again. And that's totally your choice, but you don't have to be rude in response. I think one of the most, and that is kind of the point I'm getting at. I think one of the most difficult things to do in this world today, especially today, is not being rude to people who are rude to you. They might be the nastiest person to you, and believe me, I've met some nasty people over the years. I've met people. I used to work in a grocery store, a pretty large grocery store chain. I'll just leave it at that. And no joke, I had someone come up to me in the middle of my workday, and he said, "This might be the best job you ever have in your life." And I just find that hilarious, especially today when I'm doing, not to humble brag, but I'm doing better for myself than I ever have, and I'm really grateful for that. I have a lot of people to credit in helping me along the way, like my parents and people I've learned from, and just friends of mine who have given me some really good advice over the years. But a dude literally came up to me. He didn't even know who I was, and he said his opinion was that I would never have a better job than what I had right there. I just find that so funny, but you're going to meet people like that, and you're tempted to say really nasty or just really rude things in response. And on a feelings level, that makes sense. But this translates to politics as well. Just because you're feeling something doesn't mean you need to say it. And just because you want to say it doesn't mean you have to say it that way. So those are some things to think about. And that is a lot. There's a lot to think about here. There's a lot to practice. There's a lot to be concerned about, and all these things are valid. But remember that for as much as you are passionate about what you believe, there are other people who are passionate about what they believe. And if you're willing to learn from other people and your friends, hopefully they're willing to learn from you as well. It's hard. It takes time. But I believe that people can make bridges with people. And honestly, a lot of people, especially across America, actually still care about quite a few of the same things, even if they care about them differently. Turns out that a lot of people who don't identify as hyper-partisan still care about things like median wage, being able to put food on the table, having the right health care for your family. It's what they call kitchen table issues. And I think if America is going to bridge the divide and keep things less extreme than they have been in recent years, it's probably going to be around issues like that. People being able to support their families, move forward with life, and have what they need, their basic needs met. So thank you again so much for tuning into this episode. I really appreciate any support you've shown for Bigger Hearts, Deeper Minds. You can find us on the web at biggerheartsdeeperminds.com. We're also on a variety of social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and some more coming soon. Join our email list for free, and you can get merch discounts, subscriber perks, sneak peeks, tons of cool stuff like that the public does not get access to. You can join our email list by sending a blank email to bhdm@bcast.email. And again, that is bhdm@bcast.email. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you in another episode.